The next book on our lineup is Sky Full of Elephants. I love that title, and the jacket, the cover is so beautiful. Anyway, so the author is Cebo Campbell. He's an author and creative director based in London and Brooklyn. Winner of the Linda B. Cross Creative Writing Award and the Stories Award for Poetry, Cebo's work has been featured in numerous publications, and he's co-founder of the creative agency Spherical. Sky Full of Elephants, another debut, and a really, really splendid one. Olivia Taylor Smith is a senior editor at Simon & Schuster, where she acquires literary and upmarket fiction. She's co-founder of Unnamed Press, where she was executive editor for 8+ years. So in the galley, in a letter to readers, Olivia says that this is a, quote, speculative novel that imagines Black power as an actual form of energy, a radio signal that allows people to access thousands of years of ancestral knowledge. So, that intrigued me. And the novel really delivers on that sort of premise. But what I'd like to know is, will Olivia get Cebo to share how he devised this intriguing concept? So now to the stage. Sorry, author and editor, please join. Hi, guys.
Thank you so much, Leigh. How lucky are we to have Leigh Haber as our host tonight?
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, I've done this Buzz panel now a few times, and it's just an honor. It really is. And, I meant what I said about, like opening presents. On every time UPS shows up at my door and delivers a galley, I'm, oh, what is it? What is it? Never gets old. But congratulations to you both. This is a really amazing, very important debut. So I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Leigh. And thank you all so much for being here. I'm really proud to share the screen with these wonderful authors and editors, but of course with Cebo Campbell. I'm a believer in the power of storytelling, that fiction can create a more empathetic world. And I'm sure many of you feel the same. When I read Sky Full of Elephants, I felt the power of this novel, and I was immediately swept away by the poetic voice, the inventive, immersive world building, the playful sense of humor, and these raw emotions that just cascade over you. This is a novel set in the near future without any white people. It's addressing how little progress has been made when it comes to justice and equality for Black Americans, and it's directly tying that lack of progress to a lack of knowledge, to an absence of historical awareness in our society. And so, yes, Leigh, this is my first question. Cebo, tell us how you conceived of this world.
I mean, it's a complicated question. Hello, everybody. I'm just actually really, really happy to be here. And thanks, Olivia. The concept, it's as I said, it's quite a complex thing. But in all honesty, I drew the basis of the world was inspired by actually Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And I'm sure many of you have seen that film. But the truth is when I moved to New York, I live in London now, but when I lived in New York, I was really sort of struggling with the city. And whenever I struggle with things, I immediately go to 90s films. It's just my move. I'm watching 16 Candles. I'm going 80s to 90s and aughts. That's my world. It makes me feel better. Sort of writes my universe for me. And as I'm sitting there, I'm watching this film. You've all seen it. This is Ferris. He's like the kid who's skipping school. He's going to, get his friends to skip school with him. He steals a car. He impersonates a cop. He does all this stuff. Before you know it, he's like singing Donkashay, right, on stage. And we love him. We root for him. We want his mischief to be successful. And so as I'm watching this film, as I do, I suddenly was like, had this very powerful moment where I thought, what would this movie look like if I replaced Ferris Bueller with Trayvon Martin? And the clarity with which I understood the answer to that, it stunned me. And I think everyone in here knows what the answer to that is. It wouldn't actually turn to the film. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to make my own version of Ferris Bueller. I can write that story. And when I sat down to write it, it was clear that I really struggled to just imagine the characters. And then I tried to force it into a world. And if I use the rules of the world in which we live, the characters who are just falling in love, that look like me, they're just falling in love. They don't quite work in the world. And so it just wasn't believable. And that was both an issue with how I saw the world and how the world saw me. And so I sort of defaulted back to Toni Morrison as I do. And she often talked about writing beyond the gaze, the sort of white gaze. And I thought, what would the world look like if I removed it entirely? And that just opened up all of this stuff. It sort of forced me to ask myself about the spaces in which I currently occupy. People who look like me occupy, where they don't, where the marginalized communities exist now, where they don't feel comfortable existing. And it just kept opening and opening and opening. And all these questions about if all the white people are gone, what happens to money? Who's digging for oil, right? What happens to the corporations? What happens to all these systems? How do we rebuild? How do we think about the world? And so I was obviously, my imagination was pretty illuminated, but that isn't necessarily a story. That's the world. And I knew that by alone would cover so much ground thematically. I would be able to talk about identity. I'll be able to talk about self-actualization. I'll be able to talk about a lot of different things. Black consciousness, as you said, being more of a tangible thing, something that can be repaired within this context. But what was clear to me is that as I'm sort of bringing this world together, no matter who was in it, if the people who remain weren't able to overcome their traumas, it didn't matter that this world was different. It didn't matter if it was the world that we live in now or a world that was completely inverse. We still had to endure and get over these traumas. And so that created a nice sort of soup for me to begin some interesting work. Toni will often talk about writing outside of the narrative, creating a non-narrative, so you would be able to have conversations that were beyond just what was on the page. And so that felt like the right soup to do that type of work. But with all stories, obviously, gotta have good characters. And so I think ultimately, once I had the world in my mind, and of course I went right back to Ferris because I do love Ferris Bueller. I was like, okay, this starts to make sense to me. Now I need some people that can guide me through this. And then the next step, once I had the world in my mind, was to find some characters. That's where Sydney and Charlie came in to sort of guide us through that reality.
Yeah, and Charlie, who receives a phone call in the middle of the night from the daughter that he didn't know existed, Sydney. The novel, the beating heart of the novel really is this really warm father and daughter road trip, as they are learning each other for the first time, getting to know each other for the first time. And their relationship is so special. And as they're navigating the new rules of this world, there's the scarcity you mentioned. There's, the new Chicago airport is a night market. They're headed towards Alabama, which is, would not be recognizable. But so I would love to hear about how you think about Charlie and Sydney and their relationship, because they're both processing this world in very different ways. They are entering it from having completely different experiences.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting with Charlie because Charlie's based off my dad actually, and I wanted someone who was extremely talented. My father he could build anything with his bare hands, but he was so very unfulfilled in life, and he was still searching for something he couldn't find. So I quite like that as an image, as someone to sort of come into this new world and have the opportunity to figure out themselves within it. But I needed to have a counterpart that made sense. And Sydney is biracial. And that was to some degree based off my wife, but also biracial kids. And the things that they have to deal with, the things that they have to navigate from an identity perspective, it's just so profound, so distinct. So I wanted that as a dynamic. One, Charlie has never had a daughter. He was imprisoned in the story, the beginning of the story. And of course, when the event happens, there's no more prisons. So, or at least no one's guarding prisons like that. And he's released into this new world. He's been in prison since he was a teenager, so he doesn't know, even if he's coming to the world as is, it would still be difficult for him. So he comes into this new world, and he has never met this daughter, completely estranged. And so when he meets her, She's grown up in Wisconsin. She doesn't know anything about the culture, not like that. And so she is now having to engage her father, who represents everything she ever thought about Black men, being that he was in prison and he went through all these different things, but she never imagined him as a potential father. And so you do have this very intimate father-daughter narrative, which I think is important anytime you're dealing with heady subjects, to get to something that feels personal and feels impactful to a human being. And so it's just a simple story between a father and a daughter trying to figure it out. The third eye in this is us. And I was like, okay, if I'm reading this, of course I want to follow Charlie and Sydney, but I'm also like, what does America look like? I want to know what it looks like in Indiana. I want to know like what it looks like in Wisconsin and, you know, Illinois and Missouri. What are these places that now are completely different? What do they look like? What does it feel like to drive through them? And so I thought, if I can make this about you know, America and the relationship between two people. What's up, Pennsylvania? I see you. It could be really, I think, quite magical. And I went to school in the Midwest, so I'm quite familiar with it, and I know what it felt like to be in that world. And so I wanted to start there and this sort of road trip and work our way south where I grew up and land in that space. And so I thought America could be a sort of third character for us to orient ourselves to this world, and I think it worked really well.
It's so beautiful. It's so immersive. I think we have 1 minute. Cebo, is there anything that you just want to say to all the lovely people gathered here?
I would say one of the interesting things that happened when I first wrote this book. It initially started as a short story, but I wrote it. You have to know how terrified I was to tell people what the book was about. And I work in an industry where I'm often in a room with lots of people doing pitches, and someone will go, "Oh, you wrote a book. What's the book about?" And standing in the room and going, "Well, it's a book where every white person in America dies," is like a really tough thing to say. It's a tough thing to say because it's not something that is digestible. But once you get into the narrative, you start to understand that it's not so much about that. It's about the world we live in today and the relationship to that vacancy that we can't really understand. We can't possibly see it unless we have a window. So the story is a window into that. And I would say, give it a shot. See how you feel.
Yeah, and it's about representation and.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You know, and you know, when I read The Last White Man, you know, that was a really incredible moment, you know, to think about what was happening in that novel. And I think what you've done here is, you know, gorgeous. And I love the context, you know, and I just wonder, are you still a fan of Ferris Bueller's Day Off? Or
I love it, man. I love it. I sing Dr. Shay right along with him every single time. So
right.
It's the best. I love it.
Well, this novel is totally brilliant. And Olivia, just one last question. I mean, did you know like that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this was actually, I think also, I got on the phone. I think I spoke to Cebo, you know, a day or two after I read it. This was also a very fast preempt. I just felt in my heart, this is what if I can't publish this, then what am I even doing? Yeah. Honestly, is what I said to myself.
Like, you have to go and beg someone for.
I just have to.
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, such a pleasure. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Congratulations.